missing a feeling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Becky McNattin, along with my guest host today, Shawn Bergeth. We're glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health together. And thank you for being here, Shawn.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you back on the show. It's been a little while, but I'm glad to have you here today. And you and I are taking on a very interesting topic today. We're going to process through how having comfortable living so easily and readily accessible to us can actually negatively impact our mental health, which one would kind of think is not the case. But so excited for what we're going to talk through. And you and I work together, and I want to bring listeners into a discussion we had recently, because this was really the inspiration for the show topic today. So you and I were sitting on a deck outside our office, and we were talking about a recent trip you took to the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota. You and I share a love for the outdoors, the trees, the healing power of nature. And we were talking about how going to the Boundary Waters is this test of self. And we were talking about how a cool conversation on how something that can be so hard can be so fun.
Yeah.
And how odd that is. But this experience of having life be broken down to total simplicity with very little comforts helps us realize things about ourselves.
Yeah.
And you and I were both sharing these memories of being outdoors in these rugged spaces that really challenged us to help realize things. What have you come to learn about yourself in those sorts of experiences?
I've come to learn just how powerful nature is, and how at various points in my life I've just been really disconnected from it. And then just the way in which connecting to nature aids us in connecting to ourselves. And I think about times in my life where I've struggled with aspects of my mental health. Usually there's some component of it that's a disconnection from self, and how nature can kind of be an antidote to that.
And maybe when we're in those spaces with none of the other distractions that would allow us to maybe miss a tune or distance ourselves from self, we don't have to think about it. But in nature, we're really brought back into that.
Yeah.
You shared with me this book in our conversation. You shared with me this book called The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And if you're watching us, it's right here, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. It's a book that shares about how our modern lifestyles, which are filled with comfort aspects, can negatively impact physical and mental health. And it proposes some ideas on how we can embrace discomfort, which led you and I to have what I thought was an incredible discussion on comfort, and then our need for comfort everywhere. You and I started talking about it, how it's everywhere, is part of our daily existence. And how does that need for comfort show up in your life, Shawn?
Well, it makes me think of the kind of brutal parts of winter when it's 20 below in January, and how we can move from a 70-degree home. We can preheat our car so that when we get into our car that it's warm.
Yes.
And, we might have, a couple dozen steps to walk into an office that is also 70 degrees, and lamenting about how challenging that is. And how that, those, I don't know, the environment that has so much comfort to it is just we move from one comfortable place to another, never really feeling what it's like to be cold or what it's like to enjoy the outdoors, even when it's really, really, really cold out in the middle of January in Minnesota.
And how those moments of even temperature cold, we sort of say, how do I get rid of this right away? And we get to then leap into the next spot of comfort. What's kind of interesting is that literally the day you and I were having the discussion, it started to rain on us.
Yeah.
And we actually talked about how...
Here it is in real life.
Yes, we were like, it's right here. We get to leap out of the rain.
It was so funny.
Yeah, such an important topic here. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned as we further explore the ways in which needing comfort really impacts our mental health and distress tolerance. Thank you for listening to Feels Out Loud. We will be back in just a moment.
From nobody else, all you got to do now. In a world full of strangers, you don't know the trust. All you see is danger, trying to find what you lost.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Becky McNattin, your host, and let's dive right back into our discussion on the comfort crisis. In the last segment, I mentioned the book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. Shawn, tell me how you first came to read the book, The Comfort Crisis, because we're going to be talking about concepts from it, and why those topics stuck with you.
I was introduced to the book by a really close friend, Jamie, and that prompted a conversation about some of the central themes of the book and prompted me to read it. And eventually he introduced me to one of the concepts in the book, which I eventually read about, called misogi, which is pursuit of extremely challenging activities. And it's a Japanese concept, and there's really only two rules to it. One is that there has to be like roughly a 50% chance that you'll fail.
Okay.
So something really, really challenging. And then the second rule, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek, is don't die.
Okay.
You may not die in the pursuit of this. And so the first...
So not something risky enough that would be the
Yes.
potential consequence. Okay.
Yeah. And so it just kind of grew from there. And as I shared with you earlier this morning, 4 years ago today, he and I did an exercise in misogi by running and walking the entire length of the Cannon Valley Trail from Cannon Falls to Red Wing and back. So we walked and ran for 12 hours for 41 or so miles, exactly 4 years ago today. And I just realized that this morning. I was like, that is just a really cool coincidence.
That is kind of unreal and totally interesting, the way the world works in bringing up concepts. We didn't plan that at all. But that idea of testing yourself in a pretty extreme way.
Yes.
That you don't really know if it's going to, whatever success would be, we don't know if it's going to work out.
Yes.
To really push yourself to limits. Part of what the book, I would say one of the main concepts of the book is that on those outskirts where we've tested ourselves, we really realize things about us because we've pushed ourselves. And as I started reading the book, so this whole conversation that you and I had a few months ago prompted me to order it. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm going home and I'm going to read that book. And I did. And from the beginning, page 5 hit me. Michael Easter said, most people today rarely step out of their comfort zones. We are living progressively sheltered, sterile, temperature-controlled, overfed, under-challenged, safety-netted lives. And it's limiting the degree to which we experience our one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver put it. So that's a quote directly from page 5 of his book. And I was so struck by that people rarely step out of their comfort zones. We are progressively sheltered, sterile, temperature controlled, overfed, under-challenged, and safety netted. And we talked about this even just a couple minutes ago. We moved from 70 degrees to 70 degrees to 70 degrees to complaining how it's not 70 degrees.
Yes.
So what do you think of the quote?
Well, I mean, it's really powerful, and it also kind of orients us to the finite nature of our lives, and that none of us are getting out of here alive, and it's part of one of the things that he writes about is, becoming comfortable with our own mortality, and that, by doing so, we're able to get more out of life. And another quote that he shared in that vein was, you can't fully live if you don't fully acknowledge that you'll die. And, we live in a culture that's somewhat uncomfortable with death.
Yeah.
And I found over time that actually, even noting that, we're going to have so many meals with, our children or our parents or any other loved ones. And somehow noting the finite nature of our lives kind of brings a different meaning to things that might seem mundane. And in the mundane is often, our purpose and the beauty and, our sense of, being together in the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It makes me think about when you and I were talking about just memories of the Boundary Waters and kind of testing those outskirts of self that I shared with you. So I'll share with listeners. My first experience with the Boundary Waters was a trip. I was 12 years old and it rained. I told you this because it was actively raining on us. It rained for the first 5 days of an 8-day trip. And at that point in raining straight, really for 5 days, and some of it was pouring, everything I had was wet. Everything everybody had was wet. Our tent was wet. All of our clothes were wet. We were just putting on kind of layers of what was less wet. There was no spot to dry anything out. And I was miserable. Yeah. I was absolutely miserable. We had a tough time cooking things because we needed to try to be under tarps. Often it was like, what do you just eat in a tent? It was miserable. But I realized, looking back on it, I actually had a really good time on that trip. So if somebody asked me, did you have fun? I would have said, oh, I totally did.
Yeah.
On the 5th day, it was about halfway through the day, it got super sunny. Mm-hmm. And the weather was beautiful. We stopped early that day from paddling and portaging, hung out our stuff. It actually dried pretty fast. And I remember the gratitude and appreciation for that mundane, which is what you're talking about, that I thought of dry clothes differently.
Yeah.
We had a meal that night that we cooked that I was like, this food's amazing. And it probably was not good whatsoever. Right. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, not only was I had this awareness of how incredible that was. I had such a gratitude for it. And I realized I made it through misery.
Yeah.
And just kind of a notion of the mundane, of what I don't even think about in my regular life, of my shoes or how uncomfortable things can be. And then I notice that it becomes comfortable.
Yeah. Well, and your story highlights so beautifully the need for contrast in our lives, of like what it's like to live and be wet for a few days.
Yes.
Kind of gives you a different orientation to being dry and comfortable. Mm-hmm. And like, how would we know what light was if darkness didn't exist as well?
It's a really good point. Can you tell us about a time, tell us listeners about when discomfort's been a part of your life and what you learned about yourself as a result?
Yeah, well, I've taken I've taken 3 separate solo trips into the Boundary Waters, and my most recent one was
scary.
The end of May here recently, and each time it's a little less scary. But I reflected on that experience in terms of like, one of the other things that's in the book is like embracing boredom, and just stillness and simplicity. And I reflect on this most recent solo trip into the Boundary Waters, and I can honestly say that half of it was really challenging. It was really hard. I was lonely. I was a little bit scared, and I was a little bit like questioning, like, why do I do this? Mm-hmm. And is there really value in this?
Yeah.
But it also highlights a contrast of like, so often in the midst of those experiences, there are parts of it that actually feel kind of hellish. And yet when you're on the other side of the experience and you reflect back on it, you just have these really fond memories of like, oh, well, that was challenging, but I was able to get through it.
Yeah.
And it highlights how frequently we underestimate our own capabilities, our own potential. Mm-hmm. And that, we kind of artificially, kind of condense what our actual potential is via normal life.
In the clinical world, frequently we say that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and underestimation of our capacity to cope with it.
Yes.
And that we over under thinking is kind of the thought process, that we do that all the time. And I can see then where discomfort would actually help us recognize, embrace anxiety, because we have a tendency as humans to overestimate the problem and underestimate. And if we continually don't show ourselves that we have capacity to tolerate even things that, as you say, hellish or misery, we don't have data points to say, oh, I can cope with this.
Yes.
So we have more ability to even cognitively rationalize, I can underestimate my abilities to cope with it because I don't know that I have any.
Yes. I haven't been tested.
I haven't tried.
Yeah. And, he writes in the book a little bit about like, our ancestors, like, challenge was a part of every day in terms of like, having shelter, having food, having community. And like, in a way, we have to simulate that in current life by pursuing some of these experiences. And it doesn't have to be a trip to the Boundary Waters. Mm-hmm. It can be, taking a shower in the morning and turning it really cold for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It can be walking outside in the wintertime without a jacket on and just like taking in the cold. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be dramatic choices. They can be really small and subtle things. Mm-hmm. It can be saying hi to that person in the office who seems really grumpy.
Yes.
You know, it's a low risk proposition, but you know, there are a variety of ways to pursue quote unquote discomfort.
Right.
You know, that don't require one to travel to northern Minnesota or across the globe.
Right. And you're talking about, because your solo trips, like, it's discomfort you sought.
Yes.
Sometimes discomfort also just occurs to us, mm-hmm. like the air conditioning breaks
yes.
in our house, or the water heater's busted, and now we're faced with a cold shower. But you're saying, you know, which is also what Michael Easter talks about in the book, that sometimes we do need to seek those spaces of discomfort because we live in a circumstance where we are surrounded with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to us the same way as maybe our ancestors were faced with. And Michael Easter says that discomfort is both physical and emotional. Things like hunger, cold, pain, but also stress, exhaustion, despair, that physical discomforts become emotional discomforts, and vice versa. And so in that, discomfort becomes really an important part, as you highlighted just a couple minutes ago, to even know what comfort is.
Yeah.
We have to know stress in order to know relief.
Yes. Well, and I think when we pursue the discomfort, you know, in a purposeful way, it aids us in moving through challenges that show up that aren't our choice. You know, the water heater goes out, the air conditioner goes out. It aids us in reframing those experiences of like, you know what, I can get through this. This does not have to cause like global misery because the air conditioner doesn't work and it's 90 degrees out.
Right. Well, I mean, you and I are kind of smiling right now, but we often associate convenience and comfort with things that might make us happy. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I think we could say like, oh, well, convenience and comfort does make us happy. But modern society has actually never been less happy. Yes. Lots of data shows that we have never been a less happy society. And so we could argue from that a convenient life is not necessarily a happy life.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that?
Well, Michael Easter talks about comfort as a trap, and that it is a trap in some respects. And
yes.
even the notion that you can order something and have it delivered within a few hours or tomorrow, like the sense of instant gratification that is actually in many cases hollow. It doesn't represent the relief from the thing that we're trying to get away from or correct or escape from. Yeah,
well, you bring up such an interesting point because a huge part of his book talks about the experiences we might miss in staying in comfortable circumstances. Like, what do we miss knowing about ourselves? What do we even miss experiencing? As you talked about, even to the person in the office that maybe seems grumpy, we might miss out on a relationship. We might find out that we have a connection with someone because we haven't tested ourselves. Mm-hmm. But one of my favorite parts of the book, The Comfort Crisis, is this idea of problem creep, and that he calls them comfort creep.
Yes.
And problem creep, I had never thought about this way before I read it. And essentially, everyone, for those of you who are listening, it's the psychological issue that when what we experience, when we experience less problems, we don't become more satisfied. Mm-hmm. So I'll say it again. When we experience less problems, we don't become more satisfied. We just lower the bar on what we consider a problem.
Yeah.
That's what we do as humans. We end up with the same amount of problems.
Yes.
Which it got me thinking about my own life, that when we kind of solve a problem or realize, oh, I figured that out, we don't actually have less problems. We just redefine what problem is. Yeah. And we keep moving the goalpost on our standard of what that is. And so Michael takes this in his, what he deemed comfort creep. That when a new level of comfort is introduced, we get used to that.
Yeah.
And old comforts actually become discomforts. So he calls yesterday's comfort is tomorrow's discomfort.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about how I'm a product of when we used to have pagers. And it made me think about, for those of you who are listening who maybe you were in high school or college and thought you were really awesome with a pager, that suddenly became an opportunity to communicate with people when you weren't with them. And I thought like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And around that time, the internet was so cool that we could dial up and shop or look at something online. And it might have taken us minutes to dial up. And Sean's laughing because he knows exactly that in this time, nobody could call you because the line was busy. Nobody could get a hold of you. But we solved a problem. We were like, there's this thing called the World Wide Web. But now, if we don't get immediate access to the internet, we're upset.
Yes.
And so that is comfort creep. Yes. I mean, what are your thoughts? You're smiling at me.
It's a perfect example of, having 3, young boys at home, now not so young, 20, 18, and 16. Like, the internet's down, and if it's not back up immediately, there's a huge problem.
Yes.
It's a perfect example of how this is true and how, I don't know, in my own pursuits to get off the grid, I want to get away from my phone. I want to get away from what is today's pager is now this phone that's constantly attached to me, that like escaping from that technology is actually part of what one pursues.
Yeah.
Like, how ironic.
And since I have even read the book, I've been thinking about how does comfort creep pop up in my world all the time. And so I'll do a call out to myself. Listeners, I would love for you to also consider, okay, what ways do I continue to redefine a problem? I didn't use DoorDash until a couple of years ago. It might have been around before that, but it was not present in my life. And now we don't even have to go inside a restaurant to pick up food anymore.
Yes.
And I think about, I used to go to the grocery store. I used to shop every weekend until one of my friends said, what do you use? Why don't you just get your food delivered, your groceries delivered? Or do drive up and you've just ordered it and all you have to do is go pull in the parking lot and somebody brings it out to you. And now if that doesn't happen fast enough,
right.
I'm annoyed.
Yes.
I'm annoyed. And even this double dashing.
Yes.
We redefine our series of then I need this in order to be comfortable. Well, now I need this in order to be comfortable. And anything but that causes distress.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, I laugh about it. It's also kind of sad.
Yes.
In how little we're testing ourselves then.
Absolutely.
Because you named, some pretty basic ways that we could challenge ourselves around what discomfort is. Mm-hmm. That it wouldn't take a lot, but that actually would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and when we talk about it in this context, we can see how ridiculous it is that, my DoorDash didn't arrive fast enough, or the food wasn't hot. It just kind of shines a spotlight on the absurdity of it all.
Yes. I mean, this, no joke, just happened to me last night. I ordered from DoorDash, and my order came wrong. Actually, 2 of the orders come wrong, which happens frequently. And I was so offended because by this time, I'd waited a half an hour for someone else to make my food, pick it up, drive it to me, and drop it off on my doorstep. I did literally nothing.
Yes.
But I was very offended that I had to get it redelivered. And so I fall into this all the time. Now, one concept that stood out to me in the book is that Michael says we should seek moments of discomfort through challenges, nature exposure particularly.
Yes.
Even intentional hardship. What do you think about that?
Well, when I think about time and nature for myself, and even thinking about what my ancestors must have done and how that it represents connection to just a thing that's so grand, it's so much greater than oneself, or what it's like to sit under the stars and just kind of sit with how tiny we are and how insignificant we are. Yeah. And just that it represents this connection to something that is so powerful and in some ways understood and in some ways not understood, of what do we know about the trees and how water moves and just this incredible place that we live.
Mm-hmm. Connection to something so much bigger than us.
Yeah.
And realizing we're part of something so much bigger than us.
Yeah.
How you and I have talked about, of course, we have big bias around nature being a helpful way to impact mental health.
Yeah.
How have those experiences for you impacted your mood?
I think that's a really good question. I think even all the time that I spend in nature, when I'm in the office and I look out the window and I see the trees, maybe I'm, having an extra challenging day or helping someone navigate something that's really painful. Being able to look out the window and see the trees and just kind of have this sense of trust and awe is often, it's this resource that, unless you kind of reframe what nature is and how accessible it is, you may not even realize it's there, it's present, or that it's possible.
A really good point on that. We kind of forget it's around, even though we're surrounded by it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's desensitization. We move into a spot where we're not attuned at all on what's outside of us. But in the book, he talks about feeling calmer. He definitely talked about feeling centered.
Yes.
Like he realizes parts of his core. And I maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like you've had that too.
Absolutely.
I know I have, on maybe that recognition of so much outside of myself becomes the sense of grounded inside myself too.
Yeah, for sure.
Some mental health research, and this is also in the book, highlights big cities as landscapes of despair.
Yeah.
Which I loved that term, landscapes of despair. And there is research that demonstrates people who live in cities are 21% more likely to suffer from anxiety and 39% more likely to struggle with depression than people who live in rural areas.
Yeah.
Which gets at what you were just talking about in that immersion in nature. But what do you think about those statistics?
Well, it's really fascinating to me. And one of the other things that Michael Easter references in the book is that, if you go back several generations, people are tribal in nature. And that's part of the human experience. But if you go back several generations, the community was usually no larger than 150 people.
Yeah, it was small.
And it was small. And I think about just access to information about what's happening in the world and how common it is for me to read the news and become overwhelmed. And I think that's a function of, historically, we didn't know what was happening around the globe across billions of people. Our sphere and our community was no larger than a couple hundred people.
That's a really good point.
And so I think about the differences and the contrast between, mental health of people that live in urban centers where we live versus rural areas that are, a smaller community, perhaps greater access to nature, and how that shows up and the degree to which people experience things like anxiety.
And a couple minutes ago, you talked about boredom. And for a short time in my life, I lived in rural Minnesota, central Minnesota, a lot of farm country, not really even towns. We call them, some of them were townships around me. But I remember having incredible friends, and often I was asked by people, well, what did you do? There wasn't really even a main street in the town I lived in, sort of. And a lot of this book talks about rediscover boredom. In fact, the entire second section of the book is called Rediscover Boredom, ideally outside for minutes, hours, and days.
Yes.
And I would get asked all the time from people who live in cities, well, what did you do? It sounds so boring.
Yeah.
It sounds so boring. What kinds of things were there? And that we have trouble with boredom. I remember that we would have to create things.
Yeah.
In the book, it's not necessarily a topic that might surprise a lot of people, but we're challenged from boredom to be creative.
Yes.
And how much our comfort crisis surrounds this idea of needing to be entertained all the time.
Yeah.
We cannot tolerate boredom. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I just think of, these phones in our hands and how there's always entertainment available. There's some sort of stimulation that's available where you can, if you feeling a little bit bored, I need something to fill this gap. It's so incredibly accessible, and there are dozens of different apps or ways in which to go about kind of filling that void. And, I think about my own experience, being a kid and being bored from time to time, and what a gift that is. And that, the world is so busy and so full of information, and how that's part of what contributes to our distress, is because we're not particularly equipped to take in all this information and to constantly be stimulated, and that we benefit from stillness and boredom. And I know in my own life how much I fight stillness and boredom, and why meditation has become a really important part of my life is because it's forced stillness. Is it easy? No. Do I fight a meditation in the moments before I begin one almost every time? Yes, absolutely. But it's like simulated boredom. It's like the pursuit of boredom to sit somewhere and breathe.
Well said. Well said. I think about even in like a waiting room, we instantaneously pull out our phones. We cannot even sit with a moment of what might be unoccupied or what might feel like boredom. And even in nature, part of what I always loved about camping is there were moments where we were bored.
Yeah.
It was not planned.
Yes.
There weren't things that were planned out for you. You and I have talked about how you'll just like walk through the woods.
Yes.
But when we would be together in a group that I would be camping with, we had some of the greatest fun in creating games out of the stuff that was around us, hiking, climbing, that we would say, well, what do we do?
Yes.
Or how do we just be still?
Yes. Well, and it reminds me of even like, bringing one of my sons to the dentist's office when they were young and sitting and waiting for a moment, and what happens when you pick up your phone and how that cuts you off from your own child and everyone else in the waiting room. And perhaps, there would have been the potential to have a conversation with another parent and a point of connection. And we don't connect with technology in our phones like we connect with people.
Yeah.
And how so many of us end up, we close out a day of feeling really lonely. And perhaps, at least in my own life, that loneliness is probably tied to a choice to pursue technology versus people and connection.
Well, I know I do that. Just a couple days ago, I realized my whole family, which is not often, was all sitting in the same room together, and we were all on our phones.
Yes.
Looking at our own stuff and I didn't even realize we were all sitting in the same room.
Yes.
Until I had this moment of, every one of us is on our phone right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure that we were actually integrated into what we were doing.
Sure.
I'm not sure that we really liked what any of us were.
Yeah.
And that we missed out on something there.
Yes.
Now, you brought up a couple of moments ago this topic of testing yourself and the term that he uses and the 50-50 chance of success. And it means that we're taking on something with high levels of difficulty, the idea that we push ourselves to these limits to explore our boundaries and potential. Tell us about how you did it, because you and your friend planned this out. Tell us about it.
Well, he brought up the idea. Like I said, it was the last one we did was 4 years ago today, and he brought up the idea like that spring.
Okay.
And in this context, and then I quietly hoped that he would forget about it and never bring it up again.
Sure. That's like one of those things that we'll totally do it.
Yeah,
totally do it.
And then, of course, a month later, he's like, so I'd really like to do this. Can we find a date? I think the Cannon Valley Trail would be a great place to do it. Neither one of us had ever been on that trail before. It's really beautiful. It follows the Cannon River from Cannon Falls all the way to the Mississippi River and Red Wing. And so I reluctantly agreed to it. And and we talked a little bit about contingency planning of like, well, what happens if partway through this we don't make it? And so his wife was at the ready, prepared to come and pick one or both of us up if we needed to.
Okay. Because in a 50-50 chance,
yes.
I'm assuming you guys are saying success would be we do the whole thing.
Yes.
Because, of course, we're defining a 50-50 chance of success is you picking what success looks like. But there's a high probability there, half, that you won't do that then.
Yeah, and also just talked about like, well, this isn't success if we do this and we're really injured afterwards. Of like, we got to be honest about our capabilities and our limitations, and that almost in a way that if we didn't finish it, that wasn't failure, because that's sort of the point. And that and I think about this was 4 years ago. I can't think of anything I've pursued in the 4 years since that really is close to that. So it just highlights how infrequently we are really like pushed to our absolute limits and boundaries of what we're capable of.
Yeah.
And that, several generations ago, those kinds of things, maybe they didn't happen every day, but perhaps every month, that something tested people to that degree as they were, pursuing food, hunting and gathering, and
reading about
one's basic needs.
Yeah, reading about it made me think about how often we do things that we feel we have to be good at right away.
Yeah.
For one.
Yeah.
Let alone how often we avoid doing things that if there's any sense that it might not work out.
Absolutely.
So we limit our spaces of growth.
Yeah.
But we're not even really testing.
Yes.
And you put it so well a minute ago. Perhaps this reassessment or reframing of even what success is. Some spaces of, you said, well, it won't be success if we're injured, if we finished, but there's a long-term ramification of it. But also success might be the fact that we just tried it.
Yes, that was the framework.
Because then there is no failure. The success is that we tried something we weren't even sure whether it would work or not.
Yeah.
And then by that frame, well, there isn't failing.
Yeah.
And I also started thinking about several years ago, I went to a conference where one of the breakout sessions was a poetry conference for my poetry therapy. And the breakout session was actually called Good Pain. And I went because I was intrigued by the title. Yeah. I like paradoxical titles, everyone. Listeners know this. But we had to do, as part of the breakout session, a wall sit where we were backed up against a wall. We got these pieces of paper behind us and charcoal so that we had to do a wall sit and draw the experience of what we were, just feelings that we were having. So we actually ended up with an image after we were done with this wall sit, and we needed to just do the wall sit for as long as we could. And the person who was leading us said, anytime you think you can't, try to go 5 more seconds. Every time you think you can't, try to go 5 more seconds. Did you find yourself doing that? Just to pause my story, did you find yourself doing that as you were doing your run?
Yes, okay. All the time. And just kind of testing it, of just it's like an experiment of well, can I go just a little bit longer? And I think of many years ago when I did my first longer run that I did with a different friend. And at the end of this race, and I think it was a 5K or something, this first time I did it, he was like, you're running a 10-minute mile. You can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. And that stuck with me. You can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. And he was right. But it's just the way in which we artificially limit what we think our capabilities are in our own minds.
Yeah, well, and that was so much of what that breakout session was, that we write in modern culture, kind of comfort-seeking culture, that pain is bad.
Yes.
And the leader of this breakout session, the facilitator, was trying to highlight the concept that pushing ourselves physically and emotionally actually is healing.
Yes. And
it is capacity building. He talked about it from a resilience space, that when we can see what we can endure, and we had this picture that I still have. I kept it because it reminds me of what the pain-filled experience was. But I realize what I get through in those moments. Yes. Yeah. I can see where that is actually healing.
Well, and I think as we see our own capabilities in a different light, it empowers us to see the same in others. That, when we can see our own capabilities, it gives us a different lens to see the capabilities in other people too. It can entirely shift our perspective on how we can look and be in awe of ourselves and in awe of the people in our lives and in awe of the place where we live.
Right. Well, what you're saying is, I think what he gets to as in totality of the book is this reframe on discomfort. Yeah. It's really the entire message that he's sending is discomfort is not bad.
Yes.
It might feel bad, but it is not bad. And that we can think through how to conceptualize it differently. And then when we do that with ourselves, we can do that with others.
Absolutely.
So much to think about here. We're headed to a commercial break, but when we come back, we will talk through listener questions about how to challenge this comfort crisis we all have and live amidst. Feels Out Loud will process your thoughts in just a moment.
You gotta find people.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this part of the show is where we talk through questions from you all, our listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or topics for each week that you would like us to process through, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly. You certainly can also email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. Of course, everyone, follow us on social media too, and we really want to hear from you and what you're wondering about. Big gratitude to the listeners who have sent in questions, really, Shawn, about our need for comfortable living. I think it's been an interesting experience for our listeners to even think that we have it, that we have truly a comfortable living all the time, and how this impacts our mental health, because that really is our focus in even discussing this, how it impacts our mood, how it impacts our sense of self, how it impacts our anxiety level. And so we have a couple of questions I wanted to go over today. One of our listeners said, are there daily life simple ways that I could embrace discomfort? What strategies should I try? What would you say?
I mentioned one of them of like, you're taking a shower in the morning and turn that shower to cold for, whether it's 30 seconds or a minute. Mm-hmm. I think about how do we aid this process with our children and loved ones? And,
yes.
That might be like, talking to our kids like, hey, could we just sit in quiet for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
We can start really small.
Good suggestion.
It's like this notion of like, you don't have to travel across the state to pursue these experiences. They're available anywhere, anytime. And it might just be, hey, I know you don't want to do this. How about a minute? Could we do a minute and just sit in stillness, or sit and meditate, mm-hmm. or sit in prayer? Mm-hmm. Just small things. And it might be, going outside when it's not comfortable, mm-hmm. and just taking it in, mm-hmm. And just observing in ourselves how that might change our orientation to the world and how resilient we think we are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think about, you have me pondering even what our sort of a intersection of the second question from a listener was, as a parent, I would love to help build resilience for my kid.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, hey, we can do this in daily life, simple ways to build resilience for our kids, our loved ones, and thoughts about seeking distress that they don't just see as a consequence or punishment.
Yes.
So, we're sort of intermixing those two questions from our listeners, but this idea that we can turn what would be distress into a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you're saying, could we just do this for 1 minute?
Yeah.
Could I sort of test with you right alongside you, kiddo, of being quiet for just a minute, or going and standing out in the cold for just 1 minute? Mm-hmm. I think about even, it might feel like a consequence, actually.
Sure.
So, to the parent who says, thoughts about seeking distress that don't just seem like a consequence or punishment. Well, it might feel that way, because it doesn't mean that discomfort doesn't feel.
Yeah.
But feels aren't facts.
Yeah. Yes.
I say that all the time. And so in seeking discomfort, we might slowly chisel away at our ability to reframe, but it doesn't mean it won't feel uncomfortable. It won't feel like a consequence.
Yeah. And maybe my goal is I'd love to go for a family hike, but my kids are resistant to it. So maybe you start with like, well, could we go for a walk around the block? And maybe they're resistant to that. Could we walk into the backyard barefoot and just put our feet in the grass? Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't have to be big. It can be very simple. Like, and to your point of like this, we don't necessarily want this to be a consequence, but a pursuit of something that's powerful and important.
Right.
And it might just involve taking off our shoes and socks and walking in the backyard for a few minutes.
Yeah. Well, I had this image of a time many years ago where I was with my kids and we walked through a mud puddle. For like a minute, probably it was a minute together.
Yes.
And that was not enjoyable at all for my children. And yet we made it through.
Yes.
Well, thank you. This has been awesome today.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Join us next week as we invite special guest who is practicing hypnotherapy on our show, and we will talk through that topic. And in the week ahead, be kind to yourselves. And share yourselves, friends.
Some do, some don't, some will, some won't. I wanna